The following podcast is for informational purposes only. The contents of this podcast do not constitute tax, legal, or investment advice. Take responsibility for your own decisions, consult with the proper professionals, and do your own research.
There has been a lot of, in the last year and a half, a lot of crypto AI narrative and VCs looking for deals and entrepreneurs trying to raise money on these ideas because no one actually knows what's going to happen, but everyone knows that something is going to happen.
GRTiQ podcast.
We're like astronauts floating in the space of time.
Welcome to the GRTiQ podcast. Today I'm speaking with Eshan Chordia, co-founder at Lumino AI, a company building decentralized AI solutions focused on making machine learning models more accessible and affordable. As you'll hear, Eshan's background is filled with a deep passion for tech and entrepreneurship. From his early interest in tech and video games to his experiences working in startups and at Protocol Labs, Eshan has unique perspectives on topics like AI, decentralization, and Web3. During this interview, Eshan shows his journey into Web3, his time at Protocol Labs working on Filecoin's cryptoeconomics team, and the origins behind Lumino AI. We explore the challenges and opportunities within the AI and Web3 spaces, Eshan's vision for decentralization, and why he believes that democratizing access to machine learning models is crucial for the future of tech. Eshan also provides insights into Lumino AI's unique approach and a very thoughtful, maybe as thorough as you'll hear, overview of how we should think about what the next big thing is in AI. We started the conversation with Eshan sharing his background growing up in Pittsburgh and the experiences that shaped his early passion for tech.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Nick. I'm super excited to chat. This is going to be a blast. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So I was there for the first 18 years of my life. And then I went to Carnegie Mellon there. So I was actually there, and I took an extra semester. As I was there for almost 23 years. I literally moved out to the Bay Area 2 weeks before I turned 23. So wonderful city. I loved growing up there. It's like the perfect mix of like big town and small town. 4 seasons, East Coast. Yeah, just absolute fun time.
And what types of things were you interested in, or what were some of your hobbies as you were a young person growing up?
I still am, but I was the biggest sports fan. I love sports. I into basketball, football, soccer, cricket, Olympics, into all sports. And Pittsburgh is a big sports town, like massive sports town. Yeah, that was like my biggest thing. Like I wanted to be an athlete. That was my biggest thing. I also love tech. I got into video games super early. Like today, now we're all like, okay, maybe we should push back on when kids get screens. But I think my mom actually got the original Game Boy when it first came out. So, with Tetris. So I got my first video game was the Nintendo 64. I don't remember what year it came out, but my parents got it for me for that Christmas with, oh my God, I'm forgetting the name, the N64 Mario. Oh my God, I have to Google this now. Don't worry about that. But I got that first game. I was super into video games. And then we got I think it was like 98 or 99 when like yellow version, red version, and blue version for Pokemon came out. And they had released a Game Boy Color, right? So like then the Game Boy Color came out. And they released like a Pokemon themed Game Boy Color. And so I have 2 younger brothers. So we shared all of our video games. We got, they shared the N64, Super Mario 64. That was the game. Oh my God. And then we got the Game Boy Color, the Pokemon themed one, and we got yellow version. And we used to play that so much. So I was super into video games. I think video games is actually how I got into tech. I'm 33. So I feel that like my age of millennials, it's like the similar story of video games was like the intro into tech, right? So that's how I got into tech. It was a lot of video games, a lot of sports, and Star Wars. And my dad was a Star Wars fan. They reproduced Star Wars multiple times to change like how Anakin looks at the end of Return of the Jedi and everything, right? So I saw the originals, and I don't remember for what happened for Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, but for Revenge of the Sith, my dad got us tickets for opening night for Revenge of the Sith, middle seats for all. I have two younger brothers, right? So all three of us and my dad. So I think Star Wars still is. I still watch like the Bad Batch and all the new Star Wars stuff, but Star Wars was also like a big thing for me for tech because I was like, this is space, like, all of these robots and droids. So yeah, so I think those are like the big things that really, really excited me when I was young: sports and Star Wars and video games, which I feel like is kind of a mix of like a very like nerd thing and jock thing, or but to me, I felt like most boys, that was like the thing that we did back in the day, was either Pokemon, Star Wars, or sports.
Do you remember the moment in time where you sort of matured past seeing tech as something that you just sort of game on, and it could be something that could be like a career or profession you could pursue?
Yeah, I think it was pretty early. So the iMac G3 came out in 1998, I think. And that was the first computer, and I was in elementary school in 98. That was the first computer I ever used. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. I want to build something like this. And I was floored, and I loved, it was the desktop, the CRT monitor, and I loved the design. It was something about the Apple's design. I fell in love with it, and I loved the colors. That was like the thing. It was like the shape, and then the outside is plastic. For people who are listening and don't know what the iMac G3 is, it's this like massive desktop that's covered in plastic, but they made it look beautiful. And you could take off the plastic at the back and like get into the wiring, and it was just great. And I think I was like in, I don't remember, third or fourth grade or something like that. And I was like, I want to build something like this. That was the moment where it was like a combination of technology and also combination of like, wow, that is beautiful, and I want to build something amazing, and beautiful like this. That was my entry moment into, oh, maybe like I want to build computers and I want to build stuff around computers, right? And I used to play that game. I think that the crossing game you got to get from like the East Coast to Oregon, the West Coast crossing game. I don't remember it. I think it's a computer game that we all played, and I was like, oh, I want to build games like this. This is fun. So I started thinking about it like that, and then right around 6th and 7th grade, I really got into computers. First, I would just mess around with operating systems. So I would install Linux. I would install, but like, when you say Linux, I'm talking about like you have to install distributions of Linux, right? So I would install Debian. I would install Ubuntu. I would install, I think it was called Gecko or Geeko. I don't even remember. I used to install like 7 or 8 different versions of Linux to play around with the operating systems to understand how these things work, because I just was interested in like the UI and the applications and loading stuff from source. I wasn't really programming at this point, but I was just kind of figuring it out. And then in 7th grade, I started building my own computer. So first it started out with like buying a kit and assembling. Then it ended up being like, buying just a case and like buying all the components off the shelf and then assembling. And that was like my 7th and 8th grade. A lot of the time was spent doing that, and a lot of time, honestly, before Disney bought Lucas Films, I guess it is, the Star Wars universe was like super wide, and it was probably like the best universe like ever invented. Like it went from like 3,000 years before A New Hope to like 50 years after, when like Luke is like super old. So I read like a lot of those books, but the books, the movies are great and the TV shows are great, but like the books, when you read books, they're in detail about technology or about like the Force or whatever it might be. But like that was another thing where I was like, they talk about like building stuff in the books, and I was like, oh, I want to build like robots. So robots was also the other thing that got me into. It was like, maybe I can build robots when I'm older. By this time, I was like pretty sure I was going to be an entrepreneur. So this is like around 8th or 9th grade. Now I've like built computers. Pretty sure I'm going to be an entrepreneur. Before this, my goal was to be an athlete. Up until like 6th or 7th grade, I was like, I'm going to go play football. I'm going to play baseball. I'm going to play basketball. I'm going to do something like that. And it was pretty clear that like I had no athleticism. I grew up vegetarian. My parents didn't know much about nutrition. I didn't get any protein as a kid. I was always like the slowest person or the weakest person. When we did the presidential physical thing, I was like the person who was last. I was like, this is not going to work out. Then I was like, oh, I'm going to be an artist. And I'm tone deaf and I have no musical ability. So that didn't work out for me. And I don't have any artistic ability either. So that didn't work out for me either. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to be a general manager of a sports team. So like general manager and entrepreneur were like my two things that I was going to do. And then I was like, you know what? I want to be an owner. So let's go be of a sports team. So let's go be an entrepreneur. And then hopefully I'm successful enough where I can buy a sports team and hire my GM. And I was like, I was super into tech at that point. And then I think in 9th grade or 10th grade, I got my first Apple laptop and I stopped building computers because the Apple laptop was so amazing. It's funny. We always come back to Apple on this. The Apple laptop was so amazing. I was like, oh, this is so good that I don't need to do anything. I don't need to worry about Linux. Now I started playing around with like software. I think 10th grade is when I got around to playing with software. And then that's when I started, in school. I think in high school, I took like a couple programming classes in 11th and 12th grade. And that's when it was like, okay, I'm going to go, I don't know what I want to do with my life, but I know I'm interested in computers. And so I'm going to go to a university where they let me study computers. And that's how I moved from wanting to be an athlete to being like, I'm going to go work in technology and computers is going to be the area of technology that I'm going to work in.
As you mentioned, you ended up at university at Carnegie Mellon University, and you studied electrical and computer engineering and cognitive science. Talk to us about your university experience. Did that shape a little bit more that vision you had for your career and wanting to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah. So on the entrepreneur side, I think over here, like VC backed and this kind of like high growth entrepreneurs are like, there's like these founders are like, oh my God, you're starting a company, like all of this. But in India, it's not like VC backed software companies, but like being your own boss or starting a lifestyle business is like a normal thing. For example, my grandfather on my mom's side started a jewelry business. My uncle on my mom's side started a business. My uncles on my dad's side started a business. He was the first one who didn't do I guess my uncles on my dad's side also, but he like went to IIT Madras, which is like the equivalent of MIT or Stanford in India, one of the best engineering universities in the world, and then came to Pittsburgh to do his PhD at Carnegie Mellon. And so he started a tech company, but in like chemical and mechanical engineering, in like that kind of field, right? To me, it was not weird to be like, I want to be an entrepreneur, or like, it wasn't like, oh my God, you're a crazy person. Like, this is too difficult. Like, why are you doing it? Like, that's what I grew up with. I was like, everyone has their own businesses and, that's normal. And so the whole entrepreneurship thing, I didn't really realize how me being like, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur since I was a kid, that was like super not normal because everyone I knew was like an entrepreneur. And then in Pittsburgh, there are a bunch of entrepreneurs, but then there's also like a lot of doctors. And so like that was, it wasn't like that weird being an engineer and an entrepreneur. So I got to Carnegie Mellon and I had like this super different experience than everyone. I was on a dance team. So there's this Indian dance called Bhangra. I was in that. And then I was in the Undergraduate Entrepreneurship Association. I was in the Indian Student Association. And like I was in a bunch of different extracurriculars. And I took Intro to ECE and Intro to Programming my first semester at CMU. And I loved Intro to Programming and I did not like Intro to ECE. So like I was trying to figure out how to switch my major from ECE, which is Electrical and Computer Engineering, to Computer Science. The other thing I was like, I wasn't even sure I wanted to do this. I like went through 10 different majors because in high school, I loved AP Gov. I loved AP Economics. I loved psychology. And I did not like physics. I did not like chemistry. And I did not like biology. And I liked math. So I was like, math and computers I like. And then these social sciences like economics and psychology and Gov I love. And I really do not like the physical sciences. It's like, so I was like super different from every other person in engineering where everyone was into like, science and technology. And I was like much more math and computers. And then these social sciences. And I was super into these social sciences. So in my years at CMU, it took me 4.5 years to graduate a double major and a minor because I took classes in interaction design. I took classes in human computer interaction. I took classes in cognitive psychology. I was like debating whether I wanted to be an economics major, whether I wanted to do computational finance. I was like trying to pick between, and then ECE and computer science. So I was trying to pick between 7 different majors. And I took like 2 or 3 classes in each one. And so as I got older at CMU, I realized that like I keep doing different stuff, but I keep coming back to computers, and I love computers. And at this time, like tech was taking off in Silicon Valley, right? Like Google had IPO'd by then. I think I was in high school when Google IPO'd, but like Facebook was becoming a thing. Like people were talking about Web 2 being a thing, and like all these things were happening. But like I was a college student who didn't really know that all this was happening. So I didn't realize how lucky I was to be in a field where I was studying computers, and like how big tech was going to be and what the profit margins were going to look like. And it was going to be like, basically the 2010s was the decade of software, right? Like software, cloud, etc. And so I was like just trying to figure out my life at that point. And I was super like not into studying either. Like I took like 5 classes or 6 classes a semester, and I did well in the classes that I liked, and I did super poorly in the classes I didn't like. I was like, it was like all over the place. Finally, I was like, this computer thing I really want to do. And I really, really like design. You know, at this point, they were not going to let me into the School of Design. And so I did cognitive science so that I could take all of the human computer interaction classes in the computer science department without, and then I was like one class away from majoring in HCI, basically. And so that's how I ended up in cognitive science. And I was super into psychology, but I didn't love all parts of psychology. I really like cognitive psychology. And so this was like the perfect way for me to combine like hardcore engineering with product design without studying product design. And it's like almost like, I think there's this famous major at Stanford called symbolic systems, which is like a mix of computer science and product design, or at least that's how I've always thought about it. And like Marissa Mayer talks about how like this major that she did at Stanford made her like, you know, gave her these skills in product design. And this is like my equivalent of like, okay, I studied ECE, got a minor in CS, like really understand the technical fundamentals, but took a lot of HCI and interaction design courses so I can focus on building products for like real people and not just like push technology for the sake of progress.
The GRTiQ podcast is made possible by a generous grant from the Graph Foundation. The Graph Grants program provides support for protocol infrastructure, tooling, gaps, subgraphs, and community building efforts. Learn more at thegraph.foundation. That's thegraph.foundation.
Hi, this is GRTiQ, and thank you for listening. Listeners who enjoy this content can help support the GRTiQ podcast by leaving a review or a 5-star rating wherever they download podcasts, by sharing episodes on social media, or by simply telling a friend or colleague about something they heard or learned from one of our guests. It's support from listeners like you that make it possible for us to keep shining a light on the people and stories behind Web3 and the graph. It's an amazing hack on how you got the education that you wanted, and that you took the time to make sure that you learned the things that would sort of arm you for the career or the vision you had for your career. At what point then in your life do you become aware of crypto? And can you take us back in time and kind of explain what that moment or experience was and what you were thinking at the time?
Yeah, absolutely. So like, you know, I moved out here in 2014. So, you know, I did a bunch of stuff, worked at startups, but I got into crypto in 2016. So not like late, but not super, super early. I wasn't one of those people that knew about crypto when I was in college. And like, you know, I knew people who were like, one of my dad's friends would like travel to Europe to buy, and like back then there were no exchanges. He would travel to Europe to like physically buy Bitcoin and move them from like someone else's cold wallet to his like hardware wallet to his hardware wallet. Like it was a different time back then. And I heard these stories much later, but I didn't know about Bitcoin in college and stuff like that. So I got into crypto in 2016, actually kind of how a lot of normal people got into crypto back then is like Coinbase. I was like, oh, this thing called Bitcoin is gaining value and Ethereum, I should buy. And I don't know what it is. And so I bought a bunch. And then I was like, but what is this thing? And does it have, like, will it ever be more than an asset? So then I read the Bitcoin white paper and I read the Ethereum white paper. And I was like, this is awesome. How do I learn more? And so then I started reading white papers of other protocols and started doing like Web3 projects on the side, at home, right? Building just to see how it worked. I never published anything. It was never, a business. It was never like, I'm trying to get users. I just kind of wanted to learn. And that's how I got into crypto. It was like, and it was a lot of like reading online and like being on forums and talking to people who were also into crypto. I think it was actually my roommate who got me into crypto. He was the first one. Him and I were living together at that point, and my brother was about to move in. He's the one who actually introduced it to me. And that's kind of how I got into it. And then we would have these long talks about like decentralization and will it work? And, the world is getting more centralized and not less centralized as globalization happens. Like, how does economic decentralization and legal decentralization and technical decentralization fit into this? I still have questions around these things, and I still love talking about these things. But yeah, that was my intro into crypto.
If you don't mind, can you just sort of double click on that aha moment that sort of drew your interest? And I ask it because clearly you've made a decision early in your life that you like technology. You're starting to work and build with software. You've gone to a great university. You've developed, a degree minor that will definitely perpetuate you into the tech field. So there's a lot of reasons you should stay comfortable in Web 2 and just kind of stay on that path. So what is it about the white papers that you read or the conversations that you were having that was light bulb moment for you where you're like, maybe I sort of veer off a traditional path and take a closer look at this stuff?
I love learning. Well, the way to learn to think differently is to gain knowledge, because if you can't gain knowledge, then you can't like open up your mind to different possibilities, because you're like, you get to a point where you're like, oh, I don't know more. So, you can try to think from first principles, but when it comes to like science and technology, you actually need to have fundamentals, right? Like you can't be like, oh, I'm going to, this thing makes sense, but when the laws of physics will not kind of allow you to do it. Or like in social sciences, you can try to be like, oh, we should live this way. But in reality, like humans have, the way that they want to live, and we have biases and we have perceptions, and like trying to change fundamentally human nature is extremely difficult. I liked learning just for the sake of learning. It's like the same thing as a scientist who might want to push science for the sake of pushing science and no other reason, right? That's kind of how I got into crypto. I just like learning about it more than anything. But the thing that I found super fascinating was programmable money. And the second thing I found super fascinating was building economies. I think we talked about this, right? Like I'm super into economics. Building economies when a bunch of people can come together and make decisions for that economy without that. And those people don't need to live together. They don't need to work together. They don't need to have similar political ideologies. It doesn't matter. As long as everyone is aligned on building that economy, it doesn't matter who those people are, what those people do, what those beliefs are, what part of the world they're in, but they're organized by this principle of building this economy and using this programmable money to like move the economy. And these are the two things of crypto that I find super interesting to this day. I'm thinking about this in 2016, but like we're here almost in 2025, and it's still like, it's still like super important to be able to build economies using these rules that power, the group or power that product or power that economy that you're trying to build. Once I kind of started understanding, I read the white papers of different protocols, and I've kind of started buying into like, the crypto thesis and decentralization. I think this programmable money and this wanting to build economies that do this one thing really well and doesn't matter what's happening in the outside world was the thing that really was like aha moment of crypto is a real thing. And I think it'll be like a technology of the future.
As you mentioned earlier, after you graduated, you did some work in some startups, and eventually, though, you make your way full-time into crypto. What's the backstory for how this side interest and this self-education on crypto sort of turned into a pivot away from traditional startups to going full-time into crypto?
Me focused on learning allowed me to make a couple of good decisions. So my brother and I started a company. We can talk about that later. It wasn't super successful. We shut it down in 2019. And 2019, when I was looking for a job, I really wasn't sure what I was going to do in life. It was, at this point, I'd been an entrepreneur. I'd been a designer. I'd been an engineer. I loved computer science in college, but I did not find software engineering in the real world interesting. And I think it might have been because I went through the web development I became a full stack web developer when I graduated and not focused on like back end, not focused on crypto, not focused on AI or infra. And I just found that super boring, even though I love building products. I love designing, but I didn't love the effort it took to be amazing at like the tool to turn the designs in your head into an asset that like someone could build. That effort was not something that I had fun with. And so I was like, and then I didn't really like this. And then as an entrepreneur, I was doing like technology stuff and I was doing business stuff and I was doing design stuff. And I was like, I want to do more of this. And that's when I was like, oh, I need to be a product manager. This is basically like where I'm going to. So in 2019, after this, I started applying to roles in product. And I quickly realized that there were like three kind of industries that I was just going to apply to. One was AI, the second one was crypto, and the third one was fintech. And, I always was super big into fintech. And I ended up joining Zesty AI. And so wonderful company, probably the most 3 years that I learned the most up until, starting Lumino. When it came to 2022, I'd been there 3 years. I actually wasn't looking to leave. But a bunch of Web3 companies, I guess Web3 was growing super fast at that time. A bunch of Web3 companies reached out. Protocol Labs, one of them. And I started to think about like, what is next steps in my career if I end up leaving Zesty, which at that time I was like, oh, like I'll just, grow into VP of product here. Like that'll be my thing. And it's like an AI company and we're building climate risk models. Like we're doing great work. It's amazing. And then Protocol Labs and a bunch of Web3 companies call. And then I start thinking about like, oh my God, I was thinking about AI and Web3 in 2019. I spent 3 years in AI. Like, should I start thinking about like pivoting and coming back to something that I love that I didn't get to work in before? And so I went through the interview process with a bunch of companies and then, there are offers and Protocol Labs is making this great offer and they're recruiting me hard. And I started thinking about like, if I join Web3, like, what does that mean for my career? Like, do I want to leave AI? What happens there? And then also, what kind of Web3 company do I want to join? And I came to this decision. I was like, okay, if I'm going to leave AI and I'm going to move to Web3, I want to either join a company that is building hardcore decentralized infrastructure or a company that is doing some really cool stuff in DeFi, like not yield farming, but like actual DeFi stuff. Because my thought at that time was basically the two parts of crypto and Web3 that will stick and are actually useful are the financial products that are coming out that, are changing the way that users are actually using financial products, or this set of like on the actual tech side of, decentralized infrastructure, right? Software infrastructure, hardware infrastructure. And so that's why I decided to join Protocol Labs. And it just happened at that time that like, okay, I was like, after 3 years in AI, I was like ready for the new thing. I just got lucky that, all these Web3 protocols found my background super interesting and wanted me to join their team.
So I always ask this question to guests that join and they talk about that pivot moment going full-time into Web3. You went to work at Protocol Labs, went to work on Filecoin, if I'm noting that correctly.
Yeah, I was on the Filecoin cryptoecon team, yeah.
What new insights or how did that first sort of exposure to full-time work in Web3 either reshape or double down on some of the thoughts or opinions you had about the industry?
I love this question. So one thing about working in any industry, but let's just actually use my experience of working in crypto and like reading about crypto is completely different, right? Like you can talk about like ideology and inspiration and, these are what we're trying to do. But then when I moved to crypto, I was like, okay, so it's basically like any other industry. And, there are a lot of people who believe in it. And the real difference here is that, we're trying to get groups of people to coordinate together that aren't maybe in the same place, but have a shared vision, as opposed to being in centralized. It was like, very top down. Crypto felt more bottoms up. But at the end of the day, it still requires coordination to build anything. And that coordination means that, there needs to be some sort of structure. There needs to be some sort of hierarchy. Like someone needs to be making decisions. And, whether it's one person or a DAO or, representative democracy, whatever, or straight up voting by how many tokens you own, there's some process of making decisions, right? That was one thing that I had a more naive or inspired look of crypto before joining. And then it was like more reality setting. The second thing was that I underestimated the power of cryptoeconomics to build an economic system to build a business or build a product. And so, I had a better technical understanding of Web3 and blockchain and not that strong of like a cryptoeconomic understanding of Web3 and blockchain. And I think joining the the crypto econ lab, as we call it at Protocol Labs, opened my eyes to like, the power of cryptoeconomics and this whole like concept earlier that I had of programmable money and using this programmable money to coordinate people and build economies, I actually doubled down on and I became a big believer in. I saw that and I was like, I think this can work. I think we can coordinate people to build the right things in the world using these systems. But then I also saw the dark side of, unfortunately, to all of this work, like token prices can't go down or else people lose interest. Right. And that's the dark side of crypto is I also felt like everything became financialization. Everything became about token and token price and not about the ethos of decentralized software and coordinating through non-centralized means and being more bottoms up product development. And so that's like my two like, oh my God, double down moment. And then the other is actually a stronger dark side moment of the reason why people are super into crypto is because like token prices go up. And that kind of just made me sad.
One theme I've been exploring recently on the podcast with some recent guests is this concept of the token is the product. And there's a pretty popular sort of cult following blog post out there on this topic. And I'd love to get your opinion on it. I mean, where'd you come in on that sort of argument that at the end of the day, the token is the product?
I think it's a lot more true in DeFi and something like Ethereum. The entire economy runs around the cryptoeconomics of Ether. First of all, I don't buy that all protocols need to have a token, but there needs to be some sort of like value capture and monetization capture, right? So if you don't have a token, you need to be building like a useful product for your customer or your user that they actually like and not trying to be shilling a token for no reason. But I fundamentally do believe that the difference between crypto and specifically crypto, not blockchain, right? Like I think within Web3, we have like a lot of things. We have the use of blockchain can and cannot be with crypto, right? But with crypto specifically, if you're trying to build a crypto product that has its own token, then yeah, if people lose interest in that token, like the rest of the stuff doesn't really matter. And so you're actually building two businesses at the same time. You're building the business where the customer and the user cares about the actual product you're building. And then you're building a crypto economic business as well. I think being an entrepreneur in crypto is actually harder than being an entrepreneur in like, let's say enterprise SaaS or just software in general, is because you have to think about you're running two businesses at the same time. And how do you make sure these two businesses are always aligned with each other? And so that's kind of my viewpoint on this token as the product.
So let's shift our attention then to Lumino AI. And as you've said in your story arc here, you're working at Protocol Labs, you're working on the cryptoeconomics team at Filecoin. At some point, this idea, I presume, for Lumino AI sort of begins to germinate in your mind. Take us back to the origin stories. Where did it come from and what were you sort of thinking about at the time?
So this is a funny story. So I joined Protocol Labs. They made me an offer. It was called like Unmatched. Like I went through, I forget what it's called, but they basically allowed you to join or allowed certain people to join Unmatched and you had to go find a team. And I guess Protocol Labs was growing big enough in 2022 that like they were like, Eshan will find a team. I joined and I'm debating between two teams now. I'm debating between Crypto Econ Lab and Bacalhau, which is the decentralized compute infrastructure team. They were building this, software library to do compute over data. And I'm thinking about this and I actually pitched Lumino as an idea to leadership. And they're like, but we're already doing Bacalhau and that's general. And, this is for machine learning. So let's focus on generalized compute. I was like, we should build, like FVM was coming out, right? And they just started thinking about, hey, for Filecoin to be a little bit bigger than just a storage market, we need to allow applications and L2s to be built on it. And this was like future looking. And I was like, hey, why don't we just build an L2 on top of Filecoin that allows people to train models? And they're like, but we're doing Bacalhau, compute over data. Like we're trying to integrate with Filecoin. And, Filecoin is cold storage kind of. And I was like, I'm not sure this aligns well, but I was like, okay, it's not going to work at Protocol Lab. So let me figure out which team to join, Bacalhau or Crypto Econ Lab. And I ended up joining Crypto Econ Lab and it was a super tough decision in my head. I was like, I don't know, am I making the right choice, whatever. And it's funny because then I ended up working closely with the Bacalhau team anyway later on. So Fast forward a year, Protocol Labs does like massive layoffs. 25% or more of the company gets laid off, and I get caught in the layoff. So this is February 2023. I need a break. So I took a couple of weeks off, and then I start thinking about what I want to do for my future, right? What is it going to be? And right around mid 2022, end of 2022, I felt like I was ready to start a company again. So I'd spent 3 years in AI and almost a year at Protocol Labs or 6 months at Protocol Labs. And I was like, it's been 3.5 years. I feel like I'm ready to start a company again, but I don't know when. And then this layoff happened. And then I spent a little bit of time and I was like, you know what? This seems like a good time to start a company again. I reach out to like my friends and my LinkedIn acquaintances and people, and I'm like, hey, do you guys know anyone who might be interested in starting a company? And I also stumble upon YC co-founder search. And so I start talking to a bunch of people, start doing YC co-founder search. Between my network and then YC co-founder search, I probably speak to like 80 or 90 potential co-founders, 70 on YC co-founder search, and then 20 others. And then I meet Yogesh on YC co-founder search. And out of everyone I speak to, I'm like, oh, this guy is actually amazing. He wants to start a company. A lot of people I spoke to, they were just casually looking, but they weren't really into starting a company. And I was like, I want to work with someone who's really into building companies. I met a lot of people who think the entrepreneur life is a flashy life. And it's not. It is like grind life, right? Like you have to be working all the time. Like you don't have anyone to delegate work to. You have to do everything yourself. When you're looking for a co-founder, you want someone who is great on the business side and great on the technical side and is willing to grind and understands it's not easy and there will be difficulties. And it's not just going to be like, oh, you're going to raise $5 million in like a month and you're going to, launch a product and it'll be successful, right? So it was pretty hard to find a co-founder. Yogesh and I meet. He was working on something called QuickerPay at that point. So he was at TaxBit and then he was working on the side on his own company. Originally, it was like, okay, let's experiment with QuickerPay. It was a crypto on-ramp, but specifically for gaming. We did that for like, I don't know, a month, maybe a little bit more. And we realized like this is not the right business to be in. It's cool, but there are like 25 other on-ramps. On-ramp for gaming, there are some technical things that you need to do better than like a regular on-ramp because you need super low latency and people are changing assets on Web3 gaming companies like super fast, right? And so you need to kind of have like a higher performance. Fundamentally, the issues with risk and fraud are still there. And neither of us have experience in risk or fraud. And so we're like not good entrepreneurs. We're not good founder fit for this kind of company. So he and I come together. He had a list of ideas that he wanted to work on, and I had a list of ideas that I wanted to work on, including Lumino. And we make a list and we do two things. One, we make a framework of like, what are good ideas? And this framework is, what is the market size? What are we interested in working in as personally? Because if you as a founder is not interested in working on a project, it doesn't matter how big the market size is because like you're not going to be willing to grind or get through the difficult times, right? What are our skills fit well for? You also want to start a company where your skills are fit for what the company needs. I was not a good fit to start a gaming company or to start this risk, to do risk and fraud because like I didn't have any experience in fraud and at least payment risk. We were doing insurance risk at Zesty, but no payment risk. Yeah, so these are like the three main things. And then the fourth thing was on these ideas, we spoke to like 30 or 40 people for each idea. And so then we narrowed it down. And the two leading contenders were like central bank digital currencies, which are like blockchain based, and this idea, which is also a Web3 and AI intersection idea. And that's how Lumino got started. We did a lot of work before deciding that we were going to solve this. And Yogesh has been in the Bay Area for, I think, like it's been 8 or 9 years now, or he graduated his master's. It's been 8 or 9 years. And then I've been here for 10 years. We had the list of people who were data scientists. I worked at an AI company. I spoke to, a bunch of machine learning and data science people. He spoke to people at, I think, where he went to do his master's at University of Texas, Dallas. I spoke to people at like Carnegie Mellon and UC San Diego and other places. And we were like, okay, we think there's a product to be built here. And so even before we decided to work on this, there was like a whole bunch of user research for this idea and for all the other ideas. And then when we were pretty confident that this is the idea we worked on, we met in probably end of March or early April or something like that. And then we incorporated July of last year. And so there was like a solid amount of time. We did the whole YC. YC has this like really, really good setup of like, meet in person, do a bunch of things, and then they give you a document of 20 questions. You answer the first 10 questions, and you have to take it seriously of like, what kind of company do you start? Like what kind of founders do you think are great? What products do you think are great? What skills do you have? And I don't remember the exact questions, but like a bunch of other people like didn't take it seriously. You write 2 sentences, but Yogesh and I wrote paragraphs for every question. We would meet a bunch of times and we would talk and we'd be like, oh my God, this person is serious. We're like aligned. And then we did the second set of 10 questions. And then they recommend like, oh, if you have a partner, everyone should meet. If you're going to start a company together, this is going to be hopefully like a 10 or 20 year endeavor. Everyone, needs to be on board. And so we've kind of followed this YC process and it was really good. And it worked out really well for us. We incorporate Lumino. And the week before we incorporate Lumino, I hear about Orange DAO. So we make this Orange DAO application and like without incorporating, without doing anything, we send this application to Orange DAO and they're like, we want to do an interview with you. And at this point, like we're like 20 days after the Orange DAO deadline. We sent the application just out of kicks, like, oh, let's just see what happens. And we send this application. They want to do an interview. We do the interview. It's 15 minutes, normal YC style interview. Orange DAO, was started by a whole bunch of like YC founders or ex-YC founders or whatever. And Yogesh and I are talking, we're like, I don't think the interview went so well. And so the day we incorporated, I think 2 days after, we're like, thinking about the product and get a call from James Sinka, who's the Orange DAO fellowship leader. Hey guys, you've been accepted into Orange DAO. It starts in like a week and a half. Can you let us know by the end of the week if you're joining? I kid you not, we're in a library. We're working out of a library right now. And we're in this library. It's quiet. And we're like trying not to scream and jump up in joy that we got into Orange DAO. That's how the story begins of how Lumino started. And then we got into this accelerator pre-product on the strength of, our team and our idea and the user research that we done. I think one thing that we found out later is they were like super impressed with the amount of user research we'd done on a bunch of ideas and this one before picking this product. And so yeah, it's kind of the story.
So let's talk then about what Lumino is and how it works. So what's the pitch there?
I like to call us a decentralized machine learning training protocol. So we used to call ourselves like a decentralized compute protocol, but as we did more user research and tried to get more customers on the demand side, we kind of realized that there is this missing thing in machine learning right now that it's not that easy to build models, actually. I'm not talking about like fine-tuning an LLM, but I'm talking about in general about building a model. You have to get a data set, process that data set, clean that data set. You have to build out your machine learning training pipeline. You have to train the model. You have to figure out where the model's doing well and the model's not doing well. You have to get more data to where the model's not doing well. You have to retrain that model. You have to put it in production. Then you have to see how the model's doing in production based on your, whatever data is coming from your customers. If there's drift, if it's starting to make wrong decisions, and then train that model like every few days, every week, every 2 weeks, whatever your cadence is based on, the product that you're building. And that's the customer side. This is not Web3 related. It's not crypto related. This is just understanding the demand side of what's happening in machine learning. We've been thinking about this demand side for a bit. And then the back end, which is like normally you would just deploy your training pipeline on GCP or AWS and either use a managed instance or build your own custom training pipeline. And you'd be like, I'm using GCP. And like fundamentally our belief for Lumino is we need to decentralize infrastructure. So I'm going to take a step back for a sec. In crypto and Web3, we talk about decentralization. And we're talking, what are we decentralizing, right? Like, are we decentralizing compute? Are we decentralizing economics? Are we decentralizing the tech? But, I think this deepen narrative just got interesting like the last 2 years. One thing is these cloud service providers or hyperscalers, they're eating away data center margins or profit. And I think at one point, I don't know if this is true anymore, but like 70% of all Ethereum nodes were being run on hyperscalers. You can imagine that if the hyperscalers are like, you know what, we don't want Ethereum to exist in the world, and they shut that off, that kills Ethereum. And, you can talk about Ethereum being decentralized and there being a million nodes and whatever, but, they're all being run on hyperscalers. So fundamentally, it was, how do we ensure that we have infrastructure that is not controlled by 3 or 4 entities in the world, or 5 entities in the world. The second thing was the hyperscalers have a very different cost structure that has nothing to do with their product, right? Marketing, operations, and they also have different incentives. Their incentives are not top line revenue. Their incentive is, how do I maximize my market cap in the public markets? And so that has caused them to keep, especially for like machine learning, right? Keep prices on these compute really high. And it's really expensive for the rest of us to build out, especially training models, right? Inference is also expensive, but like training is really expensive. And so we were like, how do we democratize the building of AI so that anyone can build a model, LLM or not? And how do we bring costs down so like academia can do it? And, we spoke to like postdocs and they're like, oh my God, I had to like share these bunch of machines with like 20 other people because we have to like reschedule it. And this is when we can use the machine and it slows me down. It's like, whatever, everyone just had access to super cheap compute. And then the third realization was renewable energy is coming. And so, yes, data centers are growing. And I think in the US, it uses like data centers are like 2 to 3% of all the energy usage in America. And by the end of the decade, it'll be 7 to 8%. And there's like a lot of stuff about, will we be able to meet the energy demands and will the grid be overloaded? I'm a techno optimist. And I think that where there's a problem, somebody will figure it out. So in general, I'm not too worried about it, but I know a lot of people will disagree with that statement. But in general, I was like, okay, if renewable energy is coming and, the cost of energy is going to come down, that is something that works in the favor of decentralizing infrastructure. So how do we combine these things to give a better user experience for people who want to build models and a cheaper way of being able to build models? And that's the intersection of this decentralized machine learning training protocol. And so the customer side, it's not like AWS, it's not general compute. We're not, spinning up a virtual machine and you get access to that virtual machine for the amount of time that you've paid for it, and you can do whatever you want. It is truly a machine learning training protocol. You can think of it as like a serverless experience. The experience on the customer side is very similar to the experience that OpenAI provides, and these guys have gotten it right. They have an SDK. I think they have like in different languages, but we're focused on Python since that's the predominant machine learning language. We have a Python SDK. We have these APIs available, and you can just get started training in a couple minutes. You don't need to build out these, this entire end-to-end pipeline. We're not doing the data cleaning side, so you still have to do that. But, the compute, figuring out the compute, downloading PyTorch or TensorFlow, CUDA, setting all of it up when you're training, like running into all these errors. We've done all this experimentation behind the scenes. We did all the work. We know what the errors are. The customer side is this normal SDK product. Developers use it. You can start building. You can go to our UI. You can use the UI. You don't even have to be an engineer. You can just use the UI to build yourself a model. That's like the vision on the customer side. On the back end, on the crypto side, it's like, let's use the power of cryptoeconomics and blockchain to coordinate large scale data centers to work together to train machine learning models. So that's like the vision for one product. But the vision for Lumino is to be the AI ecosystem where we build products at the intersection of AI and crypto. So this is one product. We're going to have a decentralized inference product. Then there is like an SDK for like specifically doing inference within smart contracts. There is lots of things that we could build. Now, I don't know what the future looks like and what the roadmap looks like. We don't know if this product will be successful, right? But there are lots of things that we can go into. And the vision for Lumino itself is, how do we build a company that can build multiple protocols in this AI space that can make it easier to build models, run models, make it cheap, right? Do the work that you need before the model is trained. So like data preprocessing, data cleaning, et cetera, getting the data. And then also the work after the model's trained, but not deployed for inference. So evaluation and the stuff that needs to be done to make the model better. And we're trying to capture all of that. But this is our first product.
So let's talk about sort of where Lumino is then in that life cycle process. So for listeners that are intrigued by what you're building and they want to get their hands dirty, what's available right now and how can people learn more or get, I guess, some exploration of what you're working on?
Today is Friday, September 13th. We're going to be launching our SDK in about 2 to 2.5 weeks. You will be able to go to luminolabs.ai, log in, sign up into the web app, read the developer docs, import the SDK into your project, and get started fine-tuning an LLM. Right now, what we allow is we allow people to fine-tune open source large language models, right? So the goal is Llama, Mistral, Qwen2, like whatever, right? All of them. Go to the website, go check it out, play with the product, give us feedback. Anything is allowed, right? You'd be like, if the product sucks, let us know. If you think it's amazing, let us know. If you think that we can change some stuff, let us know. If you like the developer docs, let us know. If you want to use the UI, you can do that. In about 2.5 weeks, all of this will be live from this date. That's like one way. The second way is if you're like interested, but you want help or you're not sure if this is something for you, like check out the website. You can DM me on Twitter or Farcaster. You can email me at Eshan@luminolabs.ai and I'll like help you get set up and then I can walk you through how to do this. Right now, we're focused on like being able to get people to fine tune LLMs. And then after that, we'll be launching our DevNet sometime in end of October to mid-November. We don't have the exact timeline out, but our DevNet for the decentralized protocol, right? So if you're interested in that, like again, you can DM me, you can email me. That's probably the best way to do this. If you're interested in working at Lumino, again, we were looking for people who are into machine learning, who are into software engineering. We're growing the engineering team rapidly. We're adding cryptoeconomists to the team. And then next year, we'll be adding some like non-technical folks, including like recruiting and marketing. So if you have expertise in those areas and you're like, you just want to get to know what Lumino is about and learn more, you know how to contact me. I think those are probably the best ways of contact and definitely use the product and give us feedback.
Listeners of this podcast are familiar with this concept of AI and some of the themes that are emergent within Web3 related to decentralization. So I think conceptually, a lot of listeners will understand sort of the value proposition and vision of what you're building. My question, though, is about demand. And so is there demand sort of within just the Web3 sphere itself for decentralized AI? And then if you just take sort of that next lateral step to the entire market, so all these people that are using Claude and ChatGPT, is there a demand there for something that's powered by decentralized tech?
I love this question because I think it kind of shows people's like philosophies and views on life. One, yes, there's 100% demand in Web3 and for decentralized AI and in Web2 for decentralized AI. But I'm going to be real honest with you. I think right now, blockchain, crypto, and decentralization, there haven't been enough killer apps for like, normal people who are just building models and don't care about any of this stuff to be like, decentralization is a feature I want. Our service has like a way to do it in a centralized fashion and a decentralized fashion because fundamentally, some people just don't trust decentralization. They're not going to change their minds because we are big believers in decentralization, right? And then there are some other enterprise issues with like VPC and keeping data in certain regions and then et cetera that like, maybe it doesn't work until they update their way of doing things. So we have a setting that allows us to do this in a centralized way. And then, but obviously we're building out this protocol and that's the important part, right? Not just the SDK. On the second part of like, is there demand? We're not only targeting Web3 people. We're actually, most people we talk to are not Web3 people. They're just normal people. Like, I want to build a company and I need to fine tune my LLM. They're not even the type of person like, oh, like I got to build AI and the AI is the most important thing in the world. They're like, oh, actually, I have this problem in finance, or I have this problem in legal, or I have this problem in like sales. And if I use an LLM, I can solve this problem and make it way cheaper for like my end customer. I just need to fine tune my LLM on this data set that, on my proprietary data set. And then I build the AI into the entire user experience. And it doesn't matter to the end customer whether I use AI or not. It matters if I'm solving their problem and if I'm bringing value to them. And for those people, I don't care what service I use on the back end. I just want to fine tune my LLM in a cheap manner, keep my costs down so that I can pass on those cost savings to my customer. And if I have lower OpEx, then, I'm more competitive against, the legacy incumbent software companies that have built out these really, really, complicated enterprise SaaS applications that cost a lot of money. I don't know if you saw this recently. I don't remember what company it was. I think it was Klarna, but it could have been someone else. They ripped out Salesforce. They built their own in-house, they fine-tuned an LLM. They didn't build a large language model from scratch. They fine tune an LLM. They build a user experience around it, and they've built what they claim is almost as good as Salesforce, but way, 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 way cheaper, right? We're trying to serve all people. We're not here just to serve Web3. My fundamental belief is that blockchain and crypto are technologies, and I would like us to stop using the phrase Web3. We stopped using the phrase Web2. It's part of the open internet, and let's just have blockchain and crypto part of the open internet when necessary. You can think of as like, we have different building blocks, right? We have steel, we have concrete, we have cement, we have wood, we have plastics, right? And if blockchain is steel, we don't use steel for every single application in the world. Blockchain doesn't need to be there for every single application in the world, but steel is super powerful, it's super cheap, and it allows you to do things that wood and concrete don't allow you to do, right? And so when the application is useful, or sorry, when this technology is useful, you use that technology to build a specific type of application. So that's kind of my philosophy on this blockchain and crypto. And we're trying to serve everyone in the world who wants to build a model. And we're doing it in a decentralized way. And Yogesh and I are big believers in decentralized AI, but we recognize that decentralization doesn't matter if the product that you're building doesn't have value to anyone.
I appreciate that answer, and that sentiment regarding Web3 has come up multiple times on the podcast, and I know a lot of people hold that position as well. I do want to ask you sort of this final few questions before I ask you the GRTiQ 10. The first one is, every crypto cycle, there are top-level themes that sort of drive the speculative nature of the industry and maybe the holder's interest and attention span. And AI unquestionably has been a big part of kind of the cycle we find ourselves in now. For that reason, it sort of becomes a buzzword and a garbage term that people sort of misuse and apply in probably ways that don't always work. As somebody who's building a real product on decentralization and AI, what do you make of that top level theme and maybe the way that AI has been bastardized, if you will?
It really was so people could just raise obscene amounts of money and not really build product and be like, hey, look, I raised at this valuation. We saw this with other decentralized compute protocols, or we saw this with competitors, or we saw this with just people pitching us stuff that they don't have a product, they don't know how AI works, and they were just like, AI will change how Web3 works. But it's part of life. It was, and at DeFi, NFTs, AI, like the entire world is just super excited about LLMs, right? But think about how long. So AlexNet came out, I think in 2012, right? AlexNet was that computer vision model that kind of proved that deep learning was super good, and it worked better than like anything that we had seen before. And you didn't need as much training data, or you didn't need as much energy to do the kind of work when AlexNet came out and was able to classify those images. I've been in the Valley since 2014, and people have kept using the word like AI or machine learning, and everyone at every point was like, this is fake. When they think of AI, they think about singularity, or they think about this all-knowing thing. Machine learning is part of every single product that we use today. TikTok, machine learning. Reels, machine learning. When you Google search, those rankings are based on machine learning. Your Netflix, what shows up on your Netflix page, it's machine learning. Everything that we interact with today is some sort of machine learning. And so this generative AI is just like the next step. Again, and generative AI is truly, again, it's actually like in the context of, if you think AI is, there can be like multiple things that form artificial intelligence. Like machine learning is just one of those things. And generative AI is another form of machine learning. Like we're still using the transformer architecture. I mean, we've made lots of improvements on it since like Google released the original transformer, but it's still a transformer-based architecture on the technical side, which means that we're still doing what's the probability of what the next word is going to be. And I think people have seen like, okay, LLMs truly have the ability to change user experience, build new user experiences, drop costs. It's going to be something new that we really haven't thought about these types of businesses and user experiences before. And everyone, regardless of your Web3 or not, the people who figure this out are going to be like the massive winners 5 years from now. But no one knows who's going to figure it out. No one knows what the user experience looks like. And so the only way to figure out who the winners are is bet on everyone. Because if you bet on everyone, even if you lose money on 9 out of 10 deals, that 10th company is going to make so much money that as a VC, you will get all your fund back with that one company. I mean, fund plus 10x or 100x or whatever with that one company. And so I think that's why there has been a lot of, in the last year and a half, a lot of crypto AI narrative and VCs looking for deals and entrepreneurs trying to raise money on these ideas, because no one actually knows what's going to happen, but everyone knows that something is going to happen. And so when you know something is going to happen, you have to try everything to figure out like what sticks and what doesn't stick and what customers like and what customers don't like and where is value capture in this new world and, compared to the old world of enterprise SaaS or bottoms up SaaS or whatever.
The next question I want to ask you again, following this AI theme, is you're working on a lot of very cool and interesting things at Lumino. Outside of some of that, if we're just talking about AI generally, what's the next big thing there? I sort of feel like in the minds of most listeners, ChatGPT was the big thing, but clearly there's going to be other things that come outside of just LLMs. What is it going to be?
I'm not great at predicting stuff. So I'm going to make a bunch of predictions and we can come back in 5 years and see how right I was. There's like the chip level, which is, for listeners, the chip is like the bottom level, right? That's like the infrastructure. That's the hardware infrastructure level. So there's the hardware infrastructure level. There's the software infrastructure level. There is the model level, which is like the large language models. And then there's the application level. So like the AI stack is fundamentally comprised of these 4 levels, these 4 layers. And there's innovation happening at every layer of the stack. So there's going to be, the next thing isn't just one thing, but it's the next thing at every layer of the stack. So I'm going to start with the chip level and then I'll work myself up through all the levels. At the chip layer, I think we're seeing this like a lot. I think there's a lot of new publicity around this, but in general, like NVIDIA is not going to be the dominant. They might have a majority, but they will not own 95% share of AI chips, both on training and on inference. Like by the end of the decade, like that's not going to happen because there's just too much money to be made. And you know how we had Bitcoin ASICs, right? Application specific integrated circuits. Like AI ASIC is the same. An AI chip is just an ASIC, right? So we're going to get specific AI chips that run on chips that are much more efficient for training and for inference. So I'm expecting 3 or 4 companies to win in the inference market or become big enough in the inference market that one of these conglomerates, big tech companies, buys them, both on inference and on training, right? And it might also be like AMD GPUs or AMD AI chips so it might not be like a startup, it might be like a big company, right? And Google TPUs are already really good, but Google's never released that. You can use it through Google Cloud, but like you can't get those through any other clouds. And we already know that Amazon and Microsoft and others are building their own GPUs. And then we know that Apple has been building their own GPUs for their own machines, not for cloud, but for their laptops and the iPads and the iPhones, right? So that's one thing on the chip level that's going to happen. And I don't think that's unknown. I think that most people generally buy that. The second thing I think that's going to happen on the chip level is that we're going to start seeing a lot of on-device inference. On-device inference will come first and then on-device training. And then, the fact that we kind of understand now about data privacy, like I think in the 2010s, people really were not worried about, like normal people were not really worried about data privacy and other stuff because it wasn't really clear what was happening with the data, but it is today, right? So we're going to see a lot of on-device inference and on-device chips coming. And so like when we think about Luma, we're like, okay, on-device training is going to happen. We don't know when, but we need to be able to kind of support that, right? Not just cloud-based training. Apple's already doing on-device inference right now, but they're doing it with deep learning. I think generative AI and foundational model on-device inference is going to be super interesting and will happen a lot more, especially starting with like customers who are willing to pay for it. So, Apple customers, I guess, will be the first ones. That's the chip level. Then we have the software infrastructure. So that's hardware infrastructure. Then we have software infrastructure. I think there will be a bunch of winners in both decentralized and centralized in software infrastructure. And we are like, we're at that level. We're working with GPUs and GPU providers, but we're a marketplace and Lumino builds out software. We don't actually build hardware, which is why I call ourselves a software infrastructure company, even though we work with hardware infrastructure providers, right? Data centers and stuff like that. I don't know if there is anything actually interesting to say in the software infrastructure level. It's just, this is more like enterprise business, right? Building out really cool tools for developers and stuff like that. Then there's the modeling level, which I think people find with the chip level, like the most interesting, because that's GPT-4, GPT-4o, Gemini, Llama 3.1, right? The next set of things will be like, okay, there's basically two pathways happening in foundational models. One is how do we make models like bigger and better, right? And so I think GPT-4o is already like over 1 trillion size in parameters, right? And Llama 3.1, 405 is obviously 405 billion parameters. There will be like a push to like make these models bigger. We will need more compute. It will try to do everything, right? So training costs will go up, but we're going to see over the next, I don't know, 3-4 years, these models will be able to do more and more. And the hallucinations that we're seeing today, you won't see like mass scale hallucinations. You'll see more like nuanced hallucinations, and you'll really need to be an expert to understand what's hallucinating, etc. But the second point to that is that you're going to see small specialized models. And when I say small, I'm talking about like, a couple billion parameters to 10 billion parameters. So like Llama 3.18b being used, that are cousins of the very large models, being used in a lot more places, because you don't need that much compute to do a certain job. You can fine tune a small model and get the job done, and it's way cheaper and it's way faster. So I think we'll see the big models being used for certain applications and smaller models being used for a lot more applications that are good for like one specific thing or two specific things. I am curious to see what happens. The best model in the world, I think in general, is like people think that OpenAI has the best model in the world, right? I think Llama is close for it being open weights, but not open source. And Mistral is close. Again, it's open weights, but not open source. I'm hoping that we are actually able to build an open source and open weight large language model. I want AI to become more open source. This is something I actually think will happen. So I'm predicting it now that somebody will be able to build an open source large language model that is very, very good. Let's say like 90 to 95% of OpenAI's capabilities. I know we're already almost there, but like at scale, even among the community, like when people say open source, what they really mean is open weights. And almost everyone I talk to is either using like Llama or they're using Mistral, and those are open weights, but not open source, right? So what I'm actually predicting is that an open source model will get mainstream usage in building models. And then there's the application layer, which, man, things are about to change a lot in the next few years on the application layer. We use these models to build applications. When I go to these events in SF about AI and just to be able to learn about sales and go to market, the amount of things that people are doing, reshaping the way that we interact with software and the things that software does for us today, it is breathtaking. I love being in the Bay Area right now with just the amount of stuff that's happening, that people are using AI to build applications for. I went to Theory Ventures go-to-market event a few days ago. And, people are redoing how sales software works, how marketing software works, how cybersecurity software works. I mean, it's all over the place and it is great. So I think this is probably the easiest prediction, but I think we're going to see more and more companies strip out these legacy software, especially the legacy vertical SaaS companies, and just build out like an AI and a UI, a user experience on top of that AI that does that job like better at a way cheaper cost, like a magnitude cheaper cost, one order of magnitude or more cheaper. And then somebody is going to be like, oh, let me build this like AI as a service and let me do what Salesforce does, or let me do what Workday does, or let me do whatever, name a vertical enterprise SaaS company does. And I'm going to just reimagine the user experience. So it's going to be better. It's going to be more efficient. It's going to be faster, and it'll be an order of magnitude or more cheaper. And I'm totally expecting that to happen. And I'm super excited. And at Lumino, we believe that so much that we always try out the new AI tools. So we use, Claude and GPT internally for everything, development, research, etc. We are trying out this new tool called Cursor AI. Don't know if it's going to be great or not, but one of my friends recommended, right? I just think the user experience of all of these tools that we've known for like the last 10, 15 years about to change. It's going to be great. I'm super excited.
Appreciate you answering that, Eshan. And what a great answer. So I hope all the listeners enjoyed that. I certainly did. I now want to move to the lightning round where I'm going to ask you the GRT IQ 10. These are fun questions I ask each guest of the podcast every week. Listeners love it. I love it. Gives us a chance to get to know you a little bit better, but also I always hope the listeners will learn something new, try something different, or potentially achieve more in their own lives. So, Eshan, are you ready for the GRT IQ 10?
I am ready.
The GRT IQ 10. This is the way.
10 questions for astronauts floating in space.
This is the way.
What book or article has had the most impact on your life?
This is going to be hilarious, but Harry Potter. I have read the 7 books over 30 times. I mix it up. Like I read them from front to back. I read them to 7 to 1. And every time I read them, I'm like, oh my God, like J.K. Rowling had put so much thought into it, because when you read it forward, you're like, like that's like the normal way. And then you read it backwards, you're like, in this book, they did something, but they set it up in this book. So like, it's easier to see foreshadowing being set up when you read backwards. I think Harry Potter for sure. If I was to pick one book on entrepreneurship, The Hard Things of Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. Best book I've ever read on entrepreneurship. It is detailed, it's specific. He talks about examples. There's general principles and there's examples, and you kind of can take what you want out of that book. I really, really like that book. And then on like a daily or a weekly read, I actually subscribe to The Economist, and I find it really, really good because they have sections on US, Americas, Europe, Asia, Africa. And then it breaks up into economics and finance and science and technology and culture. And kind of what I learned from that is like, one, I don't actually read any sort of news and politics outside of The Economist unless something is really happening, because like I find that reading news it's like something happened but it doesn't really matter, right? Like let's take in 2016, like, we had Hillary versus Trump, like whatever some people wrote about back then has no impact on my life today. Like I can't use that information to make better decisions in my life. So I find The Economist great because they talk about like real issues. It's not fad issues. It's like, they'll talk about microfinancing in Nigeria, or they'll talk about how mosquito nets are, saving people's lives. And it's like these things where like it ties like important stuff with real world events. So big fan of The Economist. And then I subscribe to Noah Smith and Matthew Iglesias' Substacks and Nate Silver's Substack. So those are some of the things I'm reading right now.
Is there a movie or a TV show that you would recommend everyone should watch?
Psych. There's this TV show called Psych on USA Network. Came out, I think, in 2009. It was 7 or 8 seasons. 2017, they've done 3 movies. Greatest TV show of all time. Don't at me. Like, it's amazing. My wife and I still watch it. If we need something light, that's the TV show that goes on. Greatest TV show of all time.
And how about this one, Eshan? If you could only listen to one music album for the rest of your life, which one do you choose?
This question is so hard. So in rap, I think my favorite album is probably The Carter 4 by Lil Wayne. And then in EDM, it's easily We Are All We Need by Above and Beyond. I went to the acoustic concert by Above and Beyond, the We Are All We Need acoustic concert, and it was the greatest concert I've ever been to in my life. And then there's this Hindi album called Dil To It's actually a Hindi movie that came out in I think 98 called Dil To Pagal Hai, which is the one, in my opinion, is the greatest Bollywood album of all time. So most Bollywood movies are musicals. And so they have 8, 9, 10, 11 songs, whatever. I think I would have to pick that one. If you're giving me one, I think that has to be it because it is absolutely amazing.
What's the best advice someone's ever given to you?
Oh, so I don't remember the exact quote, but I'm gonna paraphrase it because I don't want to mess up the quote. But essentially, it was along the lines of every person is unique, and you are unique as an individual. This was given to me when I was super young, so it was super early in my career. Sorry, so it was really, really transformative for me. But it was don't copy anyone else's leadership style. You are unique. If you try to copy someone else's, that's not authentic to you, people don't buy that. People will not believe in you. You have to figure out what values drive you, what's important to you, what's not important to you, and lead in that way, regardless of whether it works for everyone or not. No one's leadership works for everyone, right? I thought that was super transformative because when you're young, you're Steve Jobs and Elon Musk and, Barack Obama and whatever, right? These are charismatic people that people get behind and are considered greatest entrepreneurs of our time. And you're like, I need to be like that person. And, this was my manager at a previous company. And he was like, when you become a manager and you become a leader, you have to be authentic to yourself. Otherwise, you will not make it work. And that is the only way, or that is the best way to be a leader.
What's one thing you've learned in your life that you don't think most other people have learned or know yet?
I think we don't give enough credit to humans. I don't think I know something specific that, especially, like non-obscure knowledge that other people don't know. So I don't have a great answer for this, but I do think that I've noticed that one way I'm different than other people is, like, we live this super fast-paced life. Like, we have social stuff going on in our lives, and I'm an entrepreneur and I'm grinding, and, sometimes don't take out time, but like, just slow down. I kind of just slow down when I can and try to look around and learn. And it can be for anything. It can be like, I'm out for a walk and I just kind of start people watching and observing how people are interacting, and I'm learning what people are doing. Like, how are people walking? How are people driving? What's going on? Like, how do people react to noises suddenly? Like, random stuff, right? Another example of that can be, I love reading books, both fiction, nonfiction, fantasy, sci-fi. And a lot of times people read for fun, but they don't like take the learning from the story, or they don't like think about the learning from the story. If you just like slow down for a second, kind of like put yourself in like this fantasy series or in this fiction series, think about what's happening. I think there are like a lot of like unique learning opportunities that come up that, you just need to like slow down and think about. So I don't know if this is like knowledge, that's something I know, but I think this is kind of something different that I do that I think that a lot of people don't do.
And Eshan, what's the best life hack you've discovered for yourself?
This is going to be super boring, but sleep. Like, if I sleep 8 to 9 hours, I can work forever. It takes a long time to get tired. I think we always say, like, as entrepreneurs, we're told we have to work 16 hours, you have to work 18 hours. Like, but it's like, you have to take care of yourself, because there are a limited amount of decisions you're going to make. And making a small amount of best decisions are better than making a lot of average decisions, right? So for me, it's get sleep.
And then, based on your life experiences and observations, what's the one habit or characteristic that you think best explains how people find success in life?
Persistence. If you want to work up the corporate ladder, and that's hard, that's not easy, you have to take on more responsibility. If you want to be an entrepreneur, you just have to be persistent. Things will go bad. It's not easy. I think people underestimate persistence and hard work. Get through it. Do the hard work. I hear a lot of people today, they're like, oh, the job market's really difficult. Like, I can't get a job. And it is difficult. But like, if you want a job, let's say like you're trying to move into software engineering, do hackathons, contribute to open source classes, take Udemy nano degrees. Like, you have to put in a lot of work to, get into the position where you get lucky, right? Like, I've gotten so lucky in my life so many times, but it always starts out with like, I put myself in a position to get lucky. If I wasn't in that position, I wouldn't have gotten lucky. Like, that luck would not have happened to me,
And then the final three questions are complete the sentence type questions. So the first one is the thing that most excites me about the future, and I know you don't particularly like the term Web3, so we can say blockchain or crypto, is
financial markets moving to blockchain. Right now we're T-1, right, for clearinghouses and stuff like that. Like, can't wait until it's sub 10 minutes for like things to move, and everything, all like these types of financial transactions are on blockchain. Like, super excited for that.
And this one, if you're on X, I still call it Twitter, then you should be following.
If you're into football, follow Ben Solak. He's probably the best football analyst right now. If you're into policy and economics, follow Noah Smith on Twitter.
And the final one, complete the sentence. I'm happiest when
I'm hanging out with my family.
The GRTiQ 10.
And I show you how deep the rabbit
Eshan, thank you so much for taking time to come onto the GRTiQ podcast. It was incredibly insightful. I learned new things today about AI, about entrepreneurship and startups, and it was a lot of fun to get to know you. If listeners want to follow your work, stay in touch with the things you're working on, what's the best way for them to stay in touch?
Follow me on Twitter, on Warpcast, DM me, or LinkedIn. I'm active on all three. Or you can always just email me at Eshan@Lumino Labs.
production of the GRTiQ podcast. For more information, including detailed show notes, visit grtiq.com/podcast. That's grtiq.com/podcast.
Please consider contributing to this project and helping build the community by subscribing and leaving a review.
GRTiQ
Podcast. Roger that.